Tilea's Troubles, Part 100. Fragments. A letter from Antonio Mugello to the most noble Barone Iacopo Brunetti, Regent of Verezzo. As I wrote to my beloved Lord Lucia, whom I earnestly hope is seated beside Moor in the garden of eternal summer, imparting what little I had learned of events throughout Tilea, so too I send this missive to you. My love for Lord Lucia and my loyalty to Verezzo are now offered to you, noble lord. For you have been a faithful servant of the first, and have become the guardian of the latter. I have been lodged in Remus throughout the winter, a place most conducive to the garnering of knowledge concerning the whole of Tilea, although sometimes I witness the events themselves. A month ago, I myself watched the arrival of the army of the VMC, led by General Valkenburg, who had given up the siege of Pavona. I know not what you have heard concerning the VMC, but I presume that Duke Guidobaldo's defamatory accusation that they were behind Lord Lucia's murder and the looting of Spamanti must be painfully well known to you. From what I have learned, my lord, it seems to be generally accepted, at least here in Remus, that Duke Guidobaldo not only committed libel, but was himself responsible for the unforgivable deed. My Lord Lucia warned me on several separate occasions concerning Duke Guidobaldo's duplicitousness, and it gives me nothing but great sadness to know that his words are, post-mortem, further proof of his great wisdom. Indeed, in the last missive I received from my Lord Lucia, he informed me that he had met with General Valkenburg and found him to be a most honourable officer, who had marched north out of an earnest desire to assist in the defeat of the terrible foe. Lord Lucia was rarely, if ever, mistaken in his judgment of another, and I can see no reason to suppose he was mistaken regarding the Marienburger general. This, of course, explains recent events, most obviously General Valkenburg's siege of Pavona. And yet, despite an anger sufficient to lure him from his march north to face the vampires threatening every living soul in Tilea, he did not complete what he had begun. Considering Guidobaldo's actions and subsequent lies were tantamount to a declaration of war, I have heard several Remans voice their confusion as to why Valkenburg abandoned his retaliation. But, if you will allow me to offer mine own humble opinion, the answer seems clear to me. While we, who have suffered the loss of our dear lord at the Pavonan Duke's hands, can only feel an enduring, righteous anger, General Valkenburg personally suffered only slander, and as his fury had time to subside, as ours can never do, he must have decided that the pursuit of satisfaction regarding what in another time would be a serious matter seemed proportionately petty in light of the great threat offered by the vampire duchess. And so it is that Valkenburg's army is now camped here in the realm of Remus, apparently intending to rest a while. Perhaps they are waiting for spring before recommencing their march, or their halt might well be part of some grand strategy jointly agreed by the Archlector, Lord Alessio Falcone, and General Valkenburg. I cannot know. It does strike me, and others too, as odd that Valkenburg has now allowed himself to be delayed yet again, having only just overcome the anger that previously delayed him. Some say he is too easily distracted, but I believe, considering that which I am yet to relate to you, that he has more material concerns to factor into his strategies, such as the reports of Uomini Ratto forces and tunnel mouths north of the Trentine hills, as well as the raising of Lucini and the kidnapping of King Ferronso by the Sartosan pirates. By your leave, noble Barone, I will attempt to address these concerns, and more, in turn. It is now commonly known in Remus that the Uomini Ratto are once again stirring in Tilea, what with Lord Alessio's army discovering several entrances to huge tunnels north of the Trentine hills, and even sighting verminous forces marching above ground. I cannot know what was said in the official missives, nor even if much detail was contained therein, but enough Reman soldiers marching with Lord Alessio have sent word to their families and friends for the news to have spread. Perhaps unsurprisingly, knowing the Uomini Ratto's cowardly nature, unless amassed in great strength, Those forces fled back into the tunnels to avoid giving battle. Yet, the fact that they are openly active has begun to cause considerable consternation in a city with a somewhat checkered history of dealing with the verminkind. It has long been presumed in Tilea that rats lurk in the shadows, whispering manipulative lies, stealing valuables, sowing discord and disease. Some say that all those who dwell within a city's walls are never more than a dozen yards from a rat. But it has been many a decade since verminkind have marched in strength within sight of men, rather than concealed underground or in barren places, while embroiled in their interminable civil wars. Mugello's letter is continued after the following story. Such a shame waste. Somewhere in Tilea, end of winter, 2403-4. In the night's quietest hour, in the city's loneliest corner, several assassins, sharp of tooth and claw, were inspecting their work.
"A job very well done, master, yes?"
said one, still clutching the heavy blade he had pommelled one of the victims with before strangling the man.
"They are dead," said the master, "which was our aim desire. So yes, if it pleases you, heap congratulations where and how you like. But this here is nothing but a beginning start. Here lie the foundations of that which we shall make forge. No, not that. The first splinter cracks in that which we will destroy. Yes, that's much better."
The bearer of the blade, Chinkil by name, looked at the sword now prominently lodged in the other corpse, his eyes then flicking to scrutinise the ragged edge of his own blade.
"Master," he said, "forgive and pardon, but that blade is good and sharp. Such a shame waste to leave it here."
"The sword stays. We must need ensure that the man-things believe their own kind did this,"
said the master, his blade at hand sweeping to gesture at the scene around them, and coming dangerously close to cutting the tail of one of the watchouts behind him.
"Yes, not us, never us,"
hissed the first. He prodded his own victim with his talon foot.
"Yet, master, a mere nothing thought, I know, but this one here has a knife. Would that not satisfy in place of such a fine sword blade?"
"It might just do,"
the master agreed, apparently feeling generous.
"But no, I like the sword. It draws the eye. A knife blade is but a tiny small thing, and gives but tiny small ideas, the tool of petty squabbling thieves, too easily dismissed as bloody vengeance between the basest of man-things. This sword tells another story tale, for it is the kind the man-thing guards carry. Let their captains believe their own guards bear the blame for this nasty naughtiness."
"So very clever, master, yes,"
agreed Chinkil, while not yet quite fully willing to let go of the idea he might possess the sword.
"Yet could not a soldier dispatch kills such as these and be proud, boasting of his most satisfactory work?"
"A soldier might boast, had any one of them done this," said the master. "But none of them did, and so none will make such a claim. Then the captains will believe their command control is weak, and that they know not what their own servant soldiers do."
"Yes, master," said Chinkil, finally giving up on his petty quest to obtain the blade.
"Now," ordered the master, "look and look again. Make certain sure there is no sign or clues of our presence here."
Chinkil looked at the corpses, then at the ground around them.
"Nothing. There was only your throwing star, where now instead the sword is stuck pierced," he said. "But you have that back. This man-thing I strangled did naught but scrape-scratch at me. Pathetic, weak."
"Look again," commanded the master. "There must be nothing dropped. No fur under his nails, not even a paw print upon the ground."
Chinkil hunched down to look closer. He was getting nervous, as revealed by the raised fur on the back of his neck.
"Master, pardon forgive, but do we not stay here too long?" he asked. "If the man-things come now, they will see us, here, ourselves, and not just that we leave drop behind. Then they will know all."
"Hush, quiet," snapped the master. "I am no half-wit fool. I chose this spot, particular and careful. I chose this time, exact, and now no one will come. 4 nights this place was quite empty. Besides, look, look.
He gestured at the guards stationed all around them.
We have eyes to see and ears to hear, all around. If anyone approaches, we shall know in plenty enough time to escape leave. Now, make haste, and be certain sure there is no sign clue of our presence.
Antonio Mugello's letter continued. On more than one occasion, I have heard it voiced that this resurgence of the Uomini Ratto could spell the end of all civilization in Tilea. For if this is a new offensive, then it has begun just as the whole peninsula lies exhausted and weakened by the ongoing war against the vampires, having only recently emerged from several conflicts, the War of the Princes, the scattering of Kernag's Wag, and a veritable battering at the hands of Bouldergut's brutes. There simply might not be sufficient strength remaining in Tilea to resist the verminous hordes. Fearful rumours are rife concerning what diseases they might already be spreading, who they are about to assassinate, and which foolish rulers they have lured into a deceitful alliance. In Remas, the memory of Archlector Ordini's ignominious pact remains a scab upon the city's reputation. Is it any surprise that the Remans are openly asking which madman has called upon the verminkind's aid, perhaps hoping to attain the upper hand in some petty squabble, to gain vengeance over a particular enemy, or to retrieve some lost power? Since time immemorial, many a fool has believed he can benefit from such a foul alliance. I myself have heard myriad theories, and herein list the following, not merely to repeat malicious gossip, nor to revel in rumour, but to give the mind of the people, as such may contain more than one kernel of truth. I will address some of the most likely possibilities first, in that they concern wicked powers who would feel no compunction at allying with the likes of the Uomini Ratto. Have the Sartosans made an agreement of some sort? Would such sea-dogs balk at the idea of sharing spoils with sewer rats? If not to do so, could mean no spoils at all. The very fact that both appeared at one and the same time seems in itself to link them. Just as the Sartosans ravaged Lucini, the Uomini Ratto appeared, skulking at new tunnel mouths, so that those in between could not know which way to turn. If any state's forces are divided, it may well be more easily conquered or robbed. Has the vampire Duchess, now hard pressed by the gathering armies of Tilea, offered the Uomini Ratto some portion of the peninsula in return for luring away the armies currently threatening her? I do not pretend to know the mind of a vampire, and despite the noble trappings and haughty demeanour many adopt, I cannot dismiss the possibility that they would stoop so low as to bargain with verminkind. There seems to be no wickedness that vampires are not capable of, and thus only their evil pride might dissuade them. Much is known concerning the Duchess Maria in life, but all we can know now is that in undeath she is surely not the same. Anyone who surrounds themselves with a putrid court of rotting corpses cannot be so particular as to refuse to meet with verminkind. Several noblemen, of which there are not so many in Remas since the uprisings, have suggested that the VMC, ruled by greed alone, might have signed a secret contract in which they carve up Tilea between themselves and the rats. The VMC to rule the south, while the Uomini Ratto ruin the north. I heard one signore say this would explain why the army of the VMC has marched north so leisurely, allowing itself to be easily distracted. It may well be to their advantage that Lord Alessio's Portamajoran and Riemann army bears the brunt of the fight against the Vampire Duchess, for then both Portamaggiore and Remas can be all the more easily subdued afterwards. Furthermore, claimed the nobleman, the real reason General Valkenburg lifted the siege of Pavona was because he considered such a ruined realm a waste of effort, and wanted to keep his army strong to defeat the weakened Portamaggiore and Riemann armies, thus seizing much richer realms instead. I can say that I saw real fear in the eyes of those who listened to this signore's words, for all must have suddenly suspected the army of the VMC's prolonged encampment at Remas was an opportunity to reconnoitre the realm before seizing it for themselves. Those fearful people had not Lord Lucha's wise counsel to guide them, but of course, Had I spoken my mind, being a Verezan rebutting a Riemann gentleman in Remus, none present would be likely to agree with me. I even heard one fellow, Pavonen by his accent, say that the dwarven king in the mountains has made a pact with the verminkind to bring about an end to their meddling in the dwarfs' mines. I voiced my doubt, telling the man that the dwarfs of Carrickborgo have always craved trade, and the sort of destruction that Uomini Ratto cause would not be at all conducive to such. He just laughed, saying that would be presuming the king of the dwarfs is in command of his wits, whilst his companion spat and declared no dwarf could be trusted. Mention of this Pavonen brings me to a matter I must address, but I would first have you know that I have attempted to consider this dispassionately, as would an entirely uninterested observer, despite the fact that it concerns the murder of our beloved master. I have no doubt that the following intelligence is known to you, what with your closer proximity to Pavona, but it is clear that Duke Guidobaldo's realm has suffered dreadfully during the winter, both due to its precarious state after being ravaged by the ogres, and then as a consequence of the army of the VMC's siege. Duke Guidobaldo's own army is said to be fragmenting. Indeed, only yesterday I saw with mine own eyes some of the Riemann Bravi who had marched away with the Bavonans to become notorious for the raid on Spamanti, had returned to the streets of Remus. Such mercenary bravi could hardly be expected to honour their contract with Pavona, when there is nothing but misery and hunger for them there. The Pavonan people are now sadly starving, for the Duke took food from them to feed his soldiers. Furthermore, he has defaulted on so many loans over the last years that not one banking family is prepared to do business with him, and traders demand payments of gold in advance. What will come of all of this, I know not. Possibly his own subjects will revolt, turning against him, or perhaps he will resort again to acts of piracy and murder. Maybe his realm will simply diminish and fade into obscurity. Or, and this is what plagues my nightmares, perhaps he thinks to regain his power and wealth by means of a verminous pact. Could it be that Duke Guidobaldo of Pavona, desperate as he is, humiliated, his pride in shatters, his realm suffering, and commonly known to be capable of such lies and treachery as would put the Uomini Ratto to shame, could it be that it was he who summoned the verminkind? Of course, as yet it is unknown whether the verminkind will indeed amass in any strength, nor whether they intend a minor interference or a major incursion, nor whether they have in mind the destruction of the whole of Tilea or just some part thereof. What is known for certain, however, is that the vampire duchess has yet to be defeated. Twice before she sent armies south of Urbino, and it has taken battle after battle to prevent her further advance. Her aggressiveness is proven. If she is not destroyed, then she will almost certainly send forth her armies again and again until she has the whole peninsula in her evil grip. All the reports coming from the Riemann soldiers under Lord Alessio's command agree that Duchess Maria once again resides in Urbino. The walled and moated city teems with her undead servants. Every tower parapet is guarded by unblinking eyes. Every tomb, grave and burial pit in Urbino and Miragliano lies empty, the occupants now busied in her wicked service. Mugello's letter is continued after the following story. Glee, near the city of Urbino, at the end of winter, 2403-4. This day, this moment, felt like a culmination of Biagino's life and undeath, as if everything that had happened to him, good and bad, joyful and sad, and everything he had ever done, decent and dire, kind and cruel, led to this moment. Not the culmination, for it was not the end of his undeath, but it was a destination he had, until now, howsoever unwittingly, always been travelling to. Once more he was directly serving his beloved mistress, and he knew her satisfaction. He strove ecstatically to do whatsoever she wished, and better still, he knew exactly what that was. When leading the army at Trantio, he had had only the memory of her to guide him, her last words, which meant agonising over the details, every hour, alone, trying to fathom how those words could be obeyed in ever-changing circumstances. Now her orders were fresh in his mind, and she remained close enough that he could sense her driving will and her sharp love in every moment. Her omnipresent guidance meant his decisions came easily, his actions were swift, his delight was magnified. He was a cherished son, receiving praise from his doting mother, a beloved hound petted fondly by its mistress, a favourite blade admired in the moonlight by its wielder. He rode atop the Carroccio that once belonged to the Archlector Callictus II, captured in the same battle in which Biagino was kissed by the Duchess and became hers for evermore. In life, Callictus had been his master. He himself was but one of the Archlector's many servants, and this great waggon had been the nearest thing to a church of Moor on the field of battle. Now his holiness was dead, while Biagino himself had become a high priest. Much of Callictus's army was his to command, raised from death to march again, and the Carroccio, heaped with corpses, was now a formidable focus of necromantic magics in the service of his own church of Nagash. As the waggon trundled on, pulled by 4 pairs of entirely osseous horses, he allowed the magical winds of dark enchantment to flow through him. He fed on the power the unholy Carroccio funnelled, delighted as his mistress's diabolical will honed and shaped that power, and revelled as it poured from him to animate the vast throng of witless worshippers, the disciplinati di Nagash, all around him. His senses were not merely sharpened far beyond those of mortal men, but magnified almost exponentially, so that each of the cavorting corpses became an extension of his will, limbs with which to strike at the enemy. He even directed the horses. No lash or crop was required, as a moment's thought could turn, speed or slow the beasts as easily as a man might walk. Behind him stood 2 of his priests, members of La Fraternita di Morti Irrequieti. Their minds were bound to his will, just as his was to Duchess Maria's, yielding a very satisfactory feeling of balance. He could slavishly love and obey the Duchess while receiving the same from his priests. His own subjection, which otherwise might seem pathetic and demeaning, was given freely, for he himself was the object of exactly equal worship. They were not his puppets, like his hundreds of disciplinati, for they, like him, had minds. They obeyed because they yearned to do so, not because he directed their every movement. This is why he had created them. Having only the disciplinati to guard him would make him vulnerable. If he were to be distracted, even for a moment, then his disciplinati would be also. These 2 priests, however, could react quickly, upon their own initiative. If Biagino were wounded, even dying, these priests would retain all the strength of body and will they ever had, while the disciplinati would stumble and stagger in bewilderment, or even succumb to true death. Nevertheless, despite his gleeful joy at all these things combined, at this very moment, the satisfaction which far surpassed all others was the gloriously intense pleasure he gained from wielding the disciplinati horde. Only the tiniest slivers of their minds remained, but they were all his to rule, and the sheer size of the throng made him feel mightier than ever before. Some had been gifted to him by his mistress, resurrected after the battle of the Isean hills, close by the city of Urbino. Once dedicants of the Disciplinati di Moor, they had marched north to die. Although rotting, the winter cold had combined with necromantic magics to keep them quite whole, so that a good number, from a distance, might be mistaken for living men. Close up, however, their pallid grey flesh, staring eyes, and perhaps most of all, their stench, revealed the truth. Biagino remembered just how ugly such flagellating cultists had been when alive, and it amused him to see now that death had made them even uglier, which, back then, he might well have presumed was not possible. Most were still clad in the layers of robes they had worn in life, clutching whatever they had been carrying as they died. Many of their faces were obscured by hoods, but not all. Still others had been with him much longer, for they had died several seasons earlier at the battle for Urbino. Indeed, upon the same day Biagino had fallen. In life they had been part of Archlector Callictus's holy army of More. In undeath they had marched south with him to Trantio, then fled the valley of Naroccia to escort him all the way back to Urbino. No one could mistake these for living men, what with so much of their flesh having rotted away. In parts they were reduced almost to the bone, and their robes were torn, worn, and rotted away to a much greater degree, to reveal their now stark chines. Some amongst the horde displayed the wounds that were most likely responsible for their deaths, great incisions, shattered bones, or crumpled skulls. Others had gaping tears in their flesh made by the teeth and nails of their undead comrades during momentary lapses of guidance from their new master. They felt pain, excruciating pain, but of a kind that no longer arose from the physical wounding of their bodies. It was an agony that came from every part of them at one and the same time, both physical and spiritual. They were driven by a furious, hungry hatred, the last emotion remaining in the fragment of mind they now possessed. They seemed to leer, scowl, and glower as they ran, although in truth what remained of their decaying faces could appear no other way. There was a cruel irony to their condition, for in life they had striven to scourge themselves with chains and knotted cords into an ecstatic pain, and so induce a fighting frenzy that washed away their fear. Now their every moment was a painful frenzy, and they had forgotten fear entirely. Their old craving had been satisfied, to the full, and beyond even the extremity of their lives. Biagino loved them all. To him, they were like tin soldiers are to a boy, fanatically keen on his games of war, a precious collection to be set out this way and that, to admire from one angle, then another, while the excitement of the forthcoming battle grows ever stronger. They were his playthings, his puppets, his bambinos. They were the blades with which he could slaughter Tilea. Antonio Mugello's letter continued. Duchess Maria's forces, combined with Urbino's impressive defences, must be sufficiently strong to cause even a general of Lord Alessio's proven ability, commanding a truly mighty army, to hesitate. He has built a fortified camp south of the bridge of Pontramola, said to incorporate the bridge into its boundary. Now, apparently, he waits for the army of the VMC. Does he know, I wonder, that they are instead lingering here in Remas? Speaking to several seamen of various origins, I have learned that the Sartosans, having already razed Lucini and its villagers, defeating its small army in battle and taking the young King Ferronso hostage, then attempted to travel south along the coast. Upon their first attempt they had been driven back by the storms, which is when they took the young king. But then upon their second attempt, the storm's sister, with its easterly wind, apparently drove their fleet towards the island of Sartosa. Considering they attempted the same southerly course twice, it seems plain to me that they were intending to raid the rich realm of Alcente. I cannot know for certain, but were it not for the storms, they would at least have passed by that realm. Considering their success at Lucini, where they had only to fight a small army, perhaps they believe Alcente will prove just as easy a target, what with its main strength, the army of the VMC camped many leagues away here in Remas. As I suggested before, perhaps this is the real reason the army of the VMC has halted. General Valkenburg could well be torn between marching north as he promised to do, or returning south to protect his realm. It is reported that Duke Urco, once regent of Lucini and uncle to the captured king, and the condottieri general Marsilio da Fermo, Lucini's military commander, who once served with you, I believe, in the Grand Alliance army, have arrived together in Porto Maggiore, seeking refuge after their defeat at the hands of the Sartosans. There they are apparently pressing for Lord Alessio's assistance in the matter of their kidnapped king. They know Lord Alessio well, and perhaps believe him to be fond of the young king, for after all he did attend Ferronso's crowning. Of course, with no army of their own, with Lord Alessio's army busy in the north, and the rest of his forces no doubt ordered to guard Porta Maggiore against Sartosan raids, they seek loaned gold to pay the ransom. Oddly, it seems to be the case that they do not know the actual amount of the ransom demand, as their previous negotiations were disrupted by the battle. I suppose the Sartosans will let them know soon enough, for pirates are hardly known for their patience, nor can I imagine such ruffians take pleasure in the need to keep the young king alive. The mountain dwarves of Carrickborgo, having driven the last of Bouldergut's ogres from Campagrotta and Ravola, establishing the Bretonian nobleman Baron Garoy in the latter, and General Mazzolini and his Compagnia del Sol in the former, have apparently withdrawn back up the Carraia del Ferro to their mountain fastness. It is a widely held opinion among the Riemann merchants who have had dealings with the dwarfs that, having defeated the ogres and reseeded civilization in the neighbouring realms, King Gialdiog expects trade to flourish and goods to flow once more. However, the ongoing vampire threat and the appearance of the Uomini Ratto in the north make this unlikely, at least for now. Perhaps King Gialdiog intended to give both realms sufficient time to re-establish themselves, so that when the wars finally end, both will be ripe for rich trading opportunities. As defeating the ogres appears to have been the dwarfs' only intended contribution to the wars, King Gialdiog may have expected the Tilean realms to defeat the vampires. Now, with the resurgence of the rats, the dwarf's particular hated enemy, he might be forced to dispatch his army once more down the Iron Road. Last of all, I can report that here in Rimas it is rumoured that you have raised the militia of Verezzo, bolstered their numbers substantially, and are currently busied with drilling and exercises, all the better to defend Verezzo from the likes of the Duke of Pavona. Of course, as you know the full truth concerning this, my words are intended only to make you aware of what is believed in Rimas concerning your affairs. If there is anything I can do in your service, as your agent in Rimas, either now or at an appointed time, then you only have to say, and it shall become my foremost endeavour to obey. Your most humble servant, Antonio Mugello.